Over the last 6 weeks, I've covered my 13 training rules and guidelines. During this time, some people have reached out to me with questions about how to get started. Stay tuned, and I'll cover 3 common obstacles that are missing for many people to get their ongoing training programs started or to make their existing programs more productive and enjoyable.
Running a service business can be hard. It is not unusual for business owners in industries like contracting, home repair, auto repair, business-to-business services like janitorial, IT and accounting, and many others to feel overwhelmed by all the priorities facing them at any given time. Between addressing the needs of the customers, managing the employees, figuring out the financials, and getting processes in place, feeling like you're making significant progress on your business journey can be difficult. Welcome to Service Industry Success, hosted by Brian Harding. Each week, Brian will look at real-world strategies for building the business you are dreaming of, while also sharing tactics to get through some of the most frustrating parts of business ownership with a lot more ease. Let's get started.
So over the last 6 weeks or so, I released a series on training. And I recorded that all at once before I took off for some vacations and travel and things like that. And during the time of those episodes being released, I started getting questions from people about, hey, how could I do this or how could I get started? A lot of it was about how to get started, or I just don't feel comfortable with this part or that part. And a few things kind of were revealed that I want to cover here today, because I would like to have this whole training section in one easy to find place for people to review or as a tool to help making education and training meetings productive. Because for me, I would say this is one of the top 3 to 5 things that made our company successful, was getting this right. And this is something I would wish for anybody who's a business owner, is to understand how to do this well. Because again, I think it's absolutely critical to get this part down. And to be clear, when I'm talking about this stuff, is not necessarily just technical training. A lot of it's training about the customer experience, risk, safety for some industries, data prevention, data breaches, data integrity for others. There's lots of things to teach and train on that are not just about how we fix the widget. And that's why this is so critical, is because it's important for me to have a mechanism to transfer knowledge I have about things other than fixing the widget to the people who have to go out and make it happen, make it a reality. And if I don't have a mechanism for that, I honestly don't have a different way to impart that knowledge upon people. And so that means that I'm going to be the one left kind of always with final responsibility of making sure these things happen well. And if I have a lot of that responsibility for a lot of different kinds of problems, the company can't grow. The company cannot grow beyond the number of decisions I can make in a day, or the number of things I can be involved in a day. So this for me is just an absolutely critical thing. And I want to make sure that there's no areas that are left to chance on this. There's no areas of confusion or uncertainty. Again, this is one of those things I hope people are able to take the information here and really change their lives, hopefully in really positive ways. I know for me, this was a critical thing. And one of the things that, as I reflect on, what brought this about in our company, is, as with many things, I learned great leadership from great leaders, and I learned great leadership from horrible leaders. I learned what not to do in many cases. Some of the worst bosses I ever had demonstrated their flaws in how they held meetings. I had one guy, I'll call him John. He looked at meetings as just a pain in his butt, and as if like, I shouldn't have to tell these guys this stuff. They should already know these things. And so the meetings had that tone, as if he didn't want to be there and it was a burden for him. And if he just had better people, like, his life would be easier and he wouldn't have to commit this time, energy, and money and all that kind of stuff. And the meetings very much had that tone. And, I worked with that guy for a couple years, and it was always the way the meetings were held. Another guy, I'll call him Roy. It was just, his meetings were an opportunity for him to show everyone that he was the boss. And that's all they were about. He covered topics. He checked the box. He had his safety thing, and he had his, how to write invoices or estimates or whatever. But really, the true purpose of the meeting was to demonstrate his dominance. Now, I'm using that word purposely. His dominance over everyone else. That was the underlying tone of the meetings. That's why we had them. So everyone left with no question of who was the boss. Now I'll talk about another guy I worked with. I'll call him Sean. He just looked at these things like a captive audience to talk about himself and like reveal how smart he was. And the meetings were all about him. And he had a mid-level like supervisory kind of role. He wasn't a manager, he wasn't a business owner, but his meetings would just go on and on and on and on, and people would just tune out. And there was never a clean ending to him. Like just whenever he just like ran out of gas, that's when the meetings ended. And it was just you could see people just their interest and engagement just like wane and just you know fall off. And they dreaded the meetings because it was just a chance to listen to Sean about talk about himself, and it just they were not productive. So meetings are a window, I think, into how we operate and what our priorities are. Also, based on the questions I've gotten over the last 6 weeks, holding meetings regularly can be absolutely nerve wracking for some people. Now, obviously, there's a fear of public speaking. I'm not going to address that stuff today. This is something we just have to get over. You have to have a way to communicate knowledge to people in a way that they will actually go out and practically apply. Talking about things theoretically, I don't think is all that productive. And I don't have a better mechanism other than having conversation with people, oftentimes in groups with our employees. So I'm not going to speak about the fear of public speaking here. I'm just going to say that part is like everything else. Just it's again the cliche is like everything's like riding a bicycle. It is. You're going to skin your knee. It's going to hurt sometimes, and you just got to get through it, right? So specifically, the questions I'm going to address today are based on questions are based on questions that are rooted in a few primary areas. One is it can feel like we're the only ones in the room who care about the topics we're discussing. That was a pretty common question I got. Is like, okay, yeah, I get all these great rules and guidelines you have, Brian, but I don't think my employees really care about this stuff. They can demonstrate body language, which indicates they'd rather be somewhere else, which makes me not want to do the meetings. We don't have the meetings, we have more problems, and the meetings are all about firefighting and the customer complaint we got last Thursday and whatever. So that is something that I'm going to specifically address today. And I think that there are routines that we can follow which contribute to that apathy. And also, then there are actions we can take to overcome those challenges. Other questions came from people not having comfort about what a successful meeting looks like. Most of us can point to bad meetings that they've been part of, whether they're one off meetings or a series of meetings or just like regular monthly or weekly meetings. But not many, as many of us can point to good meetings they've regularly attended. And so here's some of the pointers that I have based on some of the questions I got about those two things: getting people to want to be at the meetings and seemingly be engaged and hopefully involved in solving problems and identifying areas of improvement. And also, like, what does a successful meeting look like? So here's the very first thing I will say about meetings is consistency is everything. We have to pick a frequency, duration, and cadence that makes sense for us and that we will stick to no matter what. And this is a critical thing, the no matter what part. There's always a reason not to have a meeting. Always. There's always some kind of customer need, a fire to put out, or other obstacle. We just have to factor that in and move on anyway. We have to plan the meeting cadence and structure and frequency and all that stuff as if there's going to be things, because there's always going to be things. I believe our people assess how seriously we take initiatives as an indicator of how serious they should take them. And if we frequently preempt meetings or cancel them or cut them really short because of very predictable obstacles, like putting out fires, dealing with a customer emergency, attendance issues, we're sending a message that the improvement we're seeking is a nice to have rather than a must have. And this improvement for me personally is not a nice to have. It's absolutely a must have, because if I don't have this improvement, I'm stuck cleaning up all the pieces when it falls apart. And again, I'm selfish and I don't want that. So I have to have people I can trust to make really good decisions. They have to use the knowledge that either I have and I'll share with them, or I don't have and we will develop together in order to make those great decisions. If I'm inconsistent on transferring this knowledge, I'm sending a message that this stuff is okay. It's important sometimes, but not really other times, which means to them it's not important at all. And I can like that or not like that. It's just I've seen it as an employee listening to people talk, and as a mid-level manager hearing people complain about my boss holding meetings, and inconsistent and like they don't have time for it, but it's a big deal when we cause a problem. And all those things manifest as we are inconsistent with meetings. And so the first and foremost thing is, I will just tell you for our company, we had a meeting every Tuesday morning. We started a half an hour early that day to allow for the meeting time. And with exceptions of, we had it on Tuesdays. So with exceptions of Memorial Day week, Labor Day week, the week between Christmas and New Year's, and depending on where New Year's fell, sometimes we would skip that one. That was it. Oh, I'm sorry, Thanksgiving week. So like 5 weeks a year, holidays would kind of preempt it, but we all knew that. Other than those holiday exceptions, like literally unless the building's on fire, we're having a meeting. And even if there was customer emergencies, which there always were, even if there were people who couldn't make it because they were on vacation or whatever, which there always were, we had the meetings no matter what. And the tone we established was, we have these meetings. It's part of who we are. It's part of how we get better. And this is just the way it is. There was no out like, well, I hope we don't have a meeting this week, because they're always going to hope we don't have a meeting this week if that's an option. So for us, consistency was absolutely vital. All right. Next thing I will talk about is a kickoff routine, a meeting, how we start the meetings. So I think some of the worst meetings I've ever attended were kicked off by jumping right into serious topics or negative topics, which could broadly be described as like a butt chewing. If our goal is to get people to clam up and shut down, the best thing we can do is come out of the gate with both barrels blazing. And I'm sure every one of you listening has been in a meeting like that. And it just sets the tone, and people just clam up, they get defensive, they just shut down. And I don't want that. I don't want people to shut down. I have a very specific outcome for the kind of participation and engagement I want from people. And if I come out of the gate both barrels blazing like that, I just got to know it's not going to be a productive meeting. Just like musicians bring in comedians to warm up the crowd, or vice versa, comedians bring in musicians to warm up the crowd. There's a lot to be said for setting the mood to ensure we have the experience we want, which for most of us, or at least me, is to have a productive meeting where we learn, engage, diagnose, and solve problems. Holding meetings with abrupt, inconsistent, or very negative openings sends the message that we've not properly prepared, we don't have a plan, or don't understand basic human nature, all of which I think costs us tremendous amount of credibility. So here's how we did it. Again, we started on Tuesdays. Now keep in mind, 40-ish% of our folks had Sunday, Monday off. 60% of our folks had Saturday, Sunday off. So this is either the first day of the week or the second day of the week for all of the participants. And how we did it was not anything sophisticated or fancy. All we did is ask a simple question that was about them. Who has a great weekend story? What's something fun you did this weekend? Tell me about your weekend. Like that's all it was. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't sophisticated, but it was a way to open the meeting every week in a predictable way that was enjoyable, was all about them, put their needs first, made it all about them to start off. And what unfolded was over time was people just getting a comfort level and talking about themselves. So I got to learn about them, which was very beneficial in ways I can barely even get into and certainly don't have time today. But other things that were just like fun about life came up. I remember this one guy, his mother-in-law was very elderly and she passed away, and she was like a borderline like hoarder. And she had just like Connex boxes full of stuff, or what, just like big storages full of stuff, sheds full of stuff that she had, picked up in 1982, like, like Furbies and like furniture and like you name it. And so one time he started talking about like, well, this weekend my mother-in-law passed away, and my wife and I got kind of charged with cleaning out her place. And so I had to, she has a lot of, he tells us the story. She's got a lot of stuff. We had to bring in like a 6-yard dumpster to like starts throwing stuff away. And then the next week came and like, okay, well, who has a fun story? Well, he started talking again about, well, we didn't make it very far last weekend because she has a lot of stuff. And what evolved with just that one instance is just learning, hearing him just talk about how his life was kind of taken over by this, unpleasant. His mother-in-law died. She was a very nice lady. That's unpleasant, certainly. We think we all experience and can all relate to. And then also like this giant project being dumped in his lap, and as a dutiful husband, he's got like no choice but to go along, and like, and it just became, a situation that was not very fun for, very serious reasons. Obviously death is not a fun thing, and obviously being charged with cleaning up somebody's estate full of, you know I remember one time he talked about how, like, those old entertainment centers that had room for like a 32-inch TV, and they were, pressed wood and things like that. He was finding stuff like that. And so it became like an adventure that we all went on with him. Like, what did you find this weekend? And it was just a enjoyable way to break the ice for a meeting that drew people in. That's the whole thing, is we wanted a way to draw people in and get them engaged. If we don't have a way to get them engaged, that's an obstacle. That's a serious one I'm going to be facing all throughout the meeting. All right. Now the opposite of that is then we had our meeting, and then we had an adjournment routine. And here's a critical thing that I think is really, really important for these kinds of meetings: is we must not allow meetings to end on a sour or random note. Restaurant owners often talk about the portion of the meal that customers are most likely to remember is dessert. How meetings end sets the tone for what employees can expect at the next meeting. If a meeting ends on a sour, unexpected note, that establishes what we can expect at the next meeting. If I want people to come to the meeting and be ready, to be willing, honest, and forthcoming participants, those are not likely outcomes with people who walk in the door reluctant, anxious, or uncertain about what to expect. And like, we don't know how this is going to go. Like, I want them to know how it's going to go. It's going to start with something where we talk about you and like what's going on in your life, and we end with this other routine that I'm going to go over here in a second. And of course, over the many months or a year, we're gonna cover topics that are uncomfortable, awkward, point out failures, lead to us having to be vulnerable and acknowledge that we didn't do well in something. I can't shy away from that, but I do need to do my part to make sure that the last moments are positive, no matter what. I need to offer something to look forward to, so the meeting is not like just a total bummer, you know. And so here's how we did it. We had a cutoff point for the meeting topic contribution. This made sure the meeting ended how we wanted it to, rather than one of those, oh, yeah, one more thing that somebody forgot until the end, which turns out to be a very negative or can cause the mood to sour. I know that we've all had meetings like that where things are going along and we were getting ready to wrap things up and things are in a positive vibe. And then somebody says, oh, one more thing. And that one more thing is a horrible way to end the meeting. We established a cutoff point where if you didn't bring your opinion up about something by this point in the meeting, we shelved it, and we stuck to that, because inevitably, if we didn't, the last thing would be a supervisor or a manager or a lead, somebody in a role like, oh yeah, this one thing happened. I was going to say, and I forgot until just now. And it's, Sally was doing this thing and it went all, sideways, or it's just a negative thing. And we would not allow the meetings to end on a negative note. So first thing is, like, we established a cutoff point where if you don't speak now or forever hold your peace, at least until next week, or we'll deal with it one-on-one after the meeting. And then so what we do after we reach that point, we kind of button things up, and then we started doing this thing we just called shout outs. Again, nothing sophisticated. There's nothing about what I'm talking about here that's complicated, fancy, or sophisticated. We just did shout outs where employees would verbalize appreciation and acknowledgement and thank yous to other employees. And they would just talk about, like, hey, I was in a situation where I wasn't really sure what to do, or I lost this tool or whatever it was. And so came and helped me, or so was really great. And they walked me through it over the phone, took some time out of their day, whatever it was. And we just established a way for the meeting to end with some positivity and enthusiasm and building the team and things like that. And that really changed the tone of the meetings, because no matter what we were talking about during the meeting, and again, we got into some things that were not fun, but no matter what, people knew they were looking forward to that part where they got to hear about how they were helping each other out and how they really cared about each other, and how they were becoming this cohesive team. And we seen real camaraderie built there. And we all know that people desperately want to be recognized and appreciated. And this provided that, so that no matter what the meeting topics were going to be, they knew that somebody somewhere was going to be recognized and appreciated, which is it just feels good. It's just a great way to end the meeting where it's a positive note and we're all a unified, cohesive team heading out the door. So That's how we did it. I'm not suggesting you have to do those exact things. I am suggesting it's critical to be consistent and have a predictable, positive way to start the meeting that draws people in, and a predictable way to end the meeting that we're all in this together. It's unity, it's cohesiveness. We're all have a smile on our face walking out the door, right? So as with all undertakings, the best one for you, of course, anything is the one you'll stick to. These are examples of how we did our meetings, but they're not necessarily suggestions for you. These things may not work for your company. That's okay. Pick something else and just pick something and try it. If it doesn't work, try something else. The one thing we must commit to here is that we will not accept failure. If we want improvement and less babysitting and less frustration and less micromanaging and less losing sleep over details and not being confident our team can do things without us making sure that they happen, figuring out productive meetings is an absolute must. At least it was for me. So, if you have any questions still, reach out. I'm easy to get a hold of. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on my email address and my phone number out there. I'm easy to get a hold of. This is something I really, really hope that everyone has some real clarity on now and some ways to make those meetings productive, because I think they're absolutely vital. Also, if you find the information I share here helpful, please pass this podcast on along to a friend or a colleague you think could benefit from it. Of course, public sharing is also appreciated. And that's it for this week, and I'll talk to you all next week.